Have you ever wondered why we've been using portraits on coins for so long? The human face is one of the most powerful communication tools we have. If you want to communicate a message all the way to the very last person, as illiterate or alienated that person might be, a portrait is instantly recognizable by any human being. We show particular people's portraits on coins to let people know who's in charge. We change their expressions to convey certain messages, from fearsome to dignified to caring and loving. We give them headgear and clothing to inform people of this particular person's position in society. We even give divinities faces, as to help people understand the divine and what sets order to the world. Today, we'll explore some ways ancient coins depicted portraits, see how the ways of showing people's faces on coins changed throughout the years, and decipher some of the complex politics and propaganda that were involved in this art. Let's go! The very first portrait of a living person to ever be put on a coin is subject to some debate, with a series of contestants being raised to the position. One of the likely candidates was Tissaphernes, a Persian ruler put in charge of the kingdom of Lydia, the region where coinage first appeared after it was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire. He is said to have minted, around the year 400 BC, small bronze coins with his portrait and the letters Tissa under his bust. When looking at such an early period on numismatic history, pretty much all coinage either features animals or deities with their highly idealized images. Having the portrait of a man with very realistic and unidealized features, such as a receding hairline, a somewhat big nose, and the letters Tissa explicitly placed underneath the bust really makes a very strong argument this might be indeed the man himself. The fact his portrait was put on bronze coins, only valid for local circulation instead of precious metals, also could have meant this coin was mostly aimed to something minor, which was to inform people just on the region who was the new man in charge. So as I've just said, the vast majority of the coinage struck at the time featured deities and animals, and probably one of the most recognizable and desirable portraits on coins of the period is that of Athena, in particular on the classical Athenian tetradrachma, struck between 454 and 404 BC for this example. We see this elegant bust of the goddess looking right, with her very well decorated crested helmet, as well as quite a few pieces of jewelry. But this portrait features more than just a well-accomplished bust. Take a look at Athena's eyes and her smile. I would argue it's not an exaggeration to say that Athena's smile is somewhat of a smug smile. This coin was minted on the 5th century BC, when the city was at the height of its power, and many other polis around the Greek world paid tribute to Athens. The Athenians knew very well they were in the center of the Hellenistic world, and their coins almost like smirked on the fact. Also, did you notice how Athena's eyes are not shown on a correct way, perspective-wise? Her bust is facing right, but her eyes are positioned on a front-facing position, like if it was looking straight at you, the observer. This is really interesting when you look at older archaic Greek art, where portraits would also be represented with front-facing eyes instead of the correct side-looking depiction. Later Athenian coins would show anatomically correct eyes, but this Athena is an example of older, archaic style lingering on the classical period. The end result, and I would argue this is yet another reason why these coins are so sought after and appreciated by collectors, is that this is a very, how can I put it, communicative coin. Athena is staring back at you, and when you switch to the reverse, you're greeted with the symbol of Athens, the owl, and it is also with its big bulging eyes staring back at you. The entire coin talks to you. As we leave the archaic period behind, and particularly in the later Hellenistic period, the Greeks would develop an outstanding standard on portraiture and sculpture. Being such skilled sculptors on marble, rock, it would be expected that part of this know-how would be applied on sculpting coin dies. This coin from Myrina in Aeolis struck around 155 and 145 BC, is an example on how the Greek ideals of a beautiful male face are applied to this idealized portrait of the god Apollo, wearing his typical laurel crown. The city was particularly fond of the god, having a major temple dedicated to him in the outskirts of the city, as well as an oracle that, according to legend, directly communicated with the god. So by that time, the Hellenistic world had a series of very powerful kings, which were depicted on their coins with a headband that symbolized royalty. It's quite striking how this coin shows a god in the same portrait style as a living king. Notice how the headband almost transforms itself into a laurel crown, showing the city considered Apollo as their true king and protector god. The reverse continues with the theme of Apollo, now with his religious ceremonial items, this time with a full body representation of the god. We can see him half covered with a robe, holding an olive branch, a patera, ceremonial cup, and next to his feet we can see an amphora, a container for liquids, and an omphalos, the mythical rock that symbolized the center of the world. On the left side, we see the legends Myrinaion, or coin from Myrina, with a series of monograms to control the coin issues at the local mint. All of the designs are within this finely crafted laurel wreath. But coin portraits did not just come in the typical side-facing style. Particularly gifted die engravers pushed themselves to differentiate their coins from other pieces in circulation by making front-facing portraits. The correct proportion on these coins is much harder to achieve than a typical lateral portrait. So not many frontal portraits are out there, and when you find one, it's quite a sight to be seen. Another shortcoming from front-facing portraits is that the highest points of the coin, the nose in particular, are very prone to wear in circulation, quickly defacing the coin. This makes any piece with an intact nose, such as this one, even more desirable. This particular piece was struck at Halicarnassus from 341 to 366 BC, the same city of the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. On the obverse, we can see this gorgeous front-facing bust of Apollo, with his flocks of hair being blown back by the wind, and the laurel wreath projecting from the top of his head on the background. The reverse features Zeus with 2 symbols of ancient Greek power, the scepter, representing Zeus's kingly power over the other gods, and the labyrinth, a double-headed axe that symbolizes the forces of life and death. This is among some of the oldest symbols of the ancient Minoans and traces back to the Bronze Age. So while the Greeks would be considered the masters of artistry on coinage, the Romans, heavily inspired by the Greeks themselves, saw on coinage a much bigger propagandistic potential. Romans were particularly good with squeezing a lot of information on their own coins. If you look at this particular example, we can see 2 busts side by side on the same coin. This is called the jugate bust. It was a way of communicating 2 people or 2 deities were inseparable one from the other. In the case of this coin, we see the semi-divine twins, Castor and Pollux, the Roman patrons of travelers, cavalrymen, sailors, and all of those who took long journeys. They were always together, so the jugate bust is there to symbolize one is inseparable from the other. This Republican denarius, struck around 108 BC, features the 2 divine twins side by side, with a couple of stars next to them. Astronavigation, or the use of the stars to help travelers guide themselves, was one of the main ways people tracked their position, and according to legend, Castor and Pollux manifested themselves as stars to help fellow travelers get safely to their destination. The reverse is also fascinating, as it dialogues directly with the obverse, continuing the theme of navigation and exploration that the Dioscuri represent. We see a galley, the typical warship of the ancient world, with a lonely sailor looking at 2 dots. These dots are clearly there to represent 2 stars, Castor and Pollux, guiding him to his destination. The name on the field is that of the moneyer responsible for the issue, Manius Fonteius. Manius was definitely a very creative man. This is a lovely example of creativity and celebration of one of Rome's divinities in coin form. As we've seen before, jugate busts, as in one bust overlapping the other, represent two inseparable people or entities, allied on one sole purpose. There is a similar design on this next coin which aims to send a similar message. These are called facing busts, and the characters here are Emperor Caracalla and his mother, Julia Domna. Facing busts are a typical Roman way of showing a strong alliance that has been formed. This coin, struck at Marcianopolis around 198 and 217 AD, shows Caracalla, now emperor after the death of his father, Septimius Severus, receiving the full support and acceptance of his mother, Julia Domna, as the new leader of the empire, and she aims, through this coin, to show she supports him totally. It's quite curious how both of their busts look quite austere and maybe even a little bit annoyed or cranky. This was very probably an intentional move. The Severan dynasty rose to power after a short but very bloody conflict, and all of its members up to that time sent a very clear message. They were direct, efficient rulers that would not accept any questioning. The legends reinforce this alliance of mother and son. Antoninus Autocrator Julia Domna, Emperor Antoninus, Caracalla's first name, and Julia Domna. Quite a striking thing to see on ancient times, a woman being depicted on a position basically just as prominent as the emperor himself. The reverse features Tyche, the goddess that protected the cities, with her crown made out of towers, a cornucopia, and a rudder, symbolizing she took the reins of the city and guided it to prosperity. The legends make reference to the legate responsible for the city administration, Leg Quintilianus, and the saying, from Marcianopolis, Marcianopolitou. As we move to the late Roman Empire, the position occupied by the emperor starts changing, and the coinage changes with it. You could be forgiven to think that this coin, struck under Emperor Honorius around 410 at the beginning of the final decline of the empire, shows this cruder design simply because the empire was in a clear decline. But the Romans were still capable of doing majestic pieces of art. This abstract art of the emperor simply means the people did not have to recognize the emperor by his portrait anymore. By that time, the emperor wasn't just a simple man. The first emperors of earlier Rome were obviously very special people, but according to Roman tradition, they were still just men, mortal like everyone else, and deified only if blessed by a good rule and therefore indirect blessing of a higher, real god. So, as a normal man, images had to be realistically depicted so people could know the man. On the late empire, however, the emperor would become something very similar to an European king of the Middle Ages. You did not have to know how did the king look like. He was an entity above you. The only thing the coin needed to really show you is that there was an emperor and the reasons why he ruled over you. And the best way to indicate the special position of the late Roman emperor is by looking at their portrait. Not only their clothing was very finely ornated with a jeweled brooch or fibula being seen close to his shoulder, but also by the return of the headdress, just like the totalitarian Hellenistic kings after Alexander the Great. This time, however, instead of a simple headband, he wears a finely crafted diadem, maybe made out of pearls and jewels. These diadems would serve as inspiration for the eventual appearance of crowns by the European kings. And in any case, any doubt was still present, for those illiterate, the legends would read Dominus Noster, our Lord, Honorius, Pius Felix, dutiful and blessed, Augustus, Emperor. The reverse features the emperor doing exactly what all Romans of that time wanted an emperor to do, crushing a barbarian under his feet. Unfortunately, this would remain on propaganda because by that time, even the great city of Rome itself would be sacked. The legends Victoria Augustorum reinforces the message that the emperor was here to give the empire military victories, although those that knew Honorius knew he was among some of the most passive emperors of the time. Basically, the reverse is a fascinating case of imperial fake news. And finally, the idea of making the late Roman emperor look like a king apparently caught on, because if we leap forward more than 400 years into the future, under the reign of Theophilos at around 831 AD, the solids were being minted with a very similar style. The only difference is that now we have a front-facing portrait of the emperor instead of the lateral-facing one. And now, instead of a diadem, the emperor wears a crown with a cross at the top, in very typical medieval fashion. We can also see him holding a cross, symbolizing his royal and religious right to rule. And the legends read Theophilos Basileos, Theophilus, king. Now the reverse is what fascinates me the most in this coin. So, counting the reverse, we have 3 people on both sides of this coin. And even cooler, this is actually a family line. While Theophilus portraits himself, the current ruler, on the obverse, the reverse honors his father, Michael II, and his son, Constantine, in a line of succession. This is a lovely piece of state propaganda that shows the current emperor comes from a line of kings and also produces himself heirs, which he has under his stewardship, showing the people that after he's gone, the rule should be maintained by a person raised from birth to the job. The legends translate to Michael and Constantine. Portraits come in many shapes, sizes, qualities, and were not only an expression of artistry, but a key piece of state propaganda, aimed at sending a message to rich and poor, cult and illiterate people alike. On my particular collection, I always aim on getting the very best portraits possible, as they are generally my favorite part of the coin. And if you particularly like any of these coins showed here, I have some good news for you. If you are watching this video before the 14th of March 2021, our sponsors at Savoca Coins will be having these coins up for auction at their 97th silver auction, as well as many other high quality pieces. Their silver auctions are aimed at higher quality pieces, so it is a great opportunity to get yourself a rare or higher quality coin. So if you are interested, definitely check them out. And if you are watching this video after the auction date, don't worry, just head over to savoca-coins.com and take a look, as other auctions should definitely be happening soon. How about you, collectors? I would like to hear from you. Have you got any particular portraits on one of your coins you really like? Maybe a certain coin with that certain special portrait you ever wanted to have? Let us know in the comments. And please don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep bringing ancient coins to YouTube. I hope you all stay safe and see you soon.